morning, Bardstown and Nelson County, and welcome to Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks and Margie Bradford are with you this morning. It's a beautiful, sunny, morning here in downtown Bardstown. And Margie, it was a pleasant drive in this morning. No rain, no hail, no high winds. No wind.
Did you have to fool with the garbage cans? That's what we want to know.
Well, I will tell you. I forgot. And so the garbage is still on the back porch. And I hope my wife's not listening.
This is an ongoing saga, chapter whatever.
Well, since our son's gone to college, it's been my job to get the garbage down. And my record is worse than his. On Wednesday morning.
Yeah, all those times you fussed at him for not getting them out.
Well, he's got 2 more weeks of school and he'll be home. So, and I'm looking forward to that.
You are.
I've already.
So that you can take a hiatus from garbage duty.
Right. Well, haven't quite gotten it down as a routine yet, and that's partly my fault because I'm getting ready for the radio show and I'm thinking 11 o'clock on, and then I walk out and I'm like, and the best thing is to help me, my wife has been loading the garbage bags in the back of my vehicle. And so it's like, I can't avoid it. I've got to unload it at the bottom.
If you don't unload it, you're bringing it to town.
Bringing it to town, that's right. Pardon me. Well, anyway, Margie, let's get to the crux of the show. We have a very special studio guest, a guy who isn't a stranger to WBRT studio, but kind of is a stranger as a civilian, I guess, in retirement. Former Judge Executive Dean Watts. Good morning, Dean.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a beautiful day indeed.
Great to have you on, and you look like you're doing well.
The good Lord has blessed me.
That's every day.
The community has blessed me.
Every day's a blessing.
Yeah, yes, it is.
All right, and I'll tell you, you don't have anything if you don't have your, decent health.
That's exactly right.
And I think one lesson I learned, Dean, is the older you get, the more you have to recognize it's your responsibility.
Yes.
To have a role in it.
Or your wife's responsibility to chew you out when you don't make the doctor's appointments. That happens to me pretty regular. Thank goodness I got a good woman.
Well, she loves you.
I guess. She does.
Well, Dean, there's a lot going on locally on the county level. Dealing with bourbon. I know that the General Assembly, there was a big push from Nelson and other counties to try to educate the General Assembly about what the impact House Bill 5 would have. And there were some changes made to House Bill 5. For example, I think it doesn't start reducing the barrel tax for 2 or 3 years, I think.
It's a few years, yeah.
Yeah, and then it phases out over time. But and I think there's some organizations have been given the power to create a taxing tax or a taxing district or something. I think if you've got emergency services to help fund that. But anyway, it still does away with the tax as we know it, and there was a lot of concern among our elected officials of how that would, because that's some significant amount of money that goes mainly to the school systems, but also city government and county government.
And the extension service.
Oh, that's right.
And the library.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And library.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In some counties, it can even impact the health departments. But not Nelson.
Right.
On that part of it.
Right. So anyway, and then more recently here in Nelson County, the fiscal court has discussed a moratorium on zoning, 90-day moratorium for zoning on any bourbon-related project that's not already underway.
Well, Jim, the way I understand it, there are 2 issues here. That's House Bill 5 is an issue, and then the fact that the court has opened up discussions regarding allowing warehouses out in the rural areas without going through the zoning process. So I see those as supposedly two separate issues.
They are. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about I was on the fiscal court when we proposed and passed the 100-acre.
Now, that was 2015.
Was it? I lose exact time on that. And why we did that, if you allow us.
Sure.
Okay, first let's look at the history of Nelson County and the bourbon industry. You know, Nelson County at one time had 29 operating distilleries. Some of that was pre-prohibition, but over the years, there's others have come along. And generally, they were in the rural area. They were majority in a rural area, primarily because that's where the spring water was.
Right.
And Nelson County was blessed with a lot of good springs, and they moved to the areas. And of course, Prohibition shut a lot of those folks down. And then after Prohibition, some of those came back. The distilleries always had a number to them, like a permit number, such and such. So the rural areas have always been home to many operating distilleries. And fiscal court changed the rule to allow distillery warehouses to go on 100 acres or more, because they were, number one, you're trying to push them out further into the rural areas where it's not densely populated.
Right.
That has not happened 100%. Some of the farms are being bought within that distilleries are buying a little bit closer to town than you really like to have, but they have to go on who wants to sell their properties. And the growth in the industry has been so tremendous that the industry is worried about now where they're going to go with warehouses. And as a community, I think we ought to ask ourselves, where are these warehouses going to go? If we go back to the zoning, not to permitted use in the agricultural zone, but go through the PUDs or whatever you want to go through. The comprehensive plan currently, and Jan can correct me if I'm wrong on this, did not qualify or allow. I guess everybody can hear me, can't they?
Yeah, I've got you on now. Go ahead.
Okay, so I've been on the whole time. Well,
her mic's got you.
Okay. So the permitted use part of it, we changed it because it made it much easier for distilleries to get their warehouses built, and we were pushing them out to the rural areas where the population. Just let's take Barton's 1792 distillery for example. Barton's was Tom Moore Distillery back in the 1800s, early 1900s.
Right.
That was before Maple Hill was built.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, that was outside town then.
Oh, it was outside of town, exactly. And Heaven Hill, same way, outside of town. Most of them were somewhat out of town at that time because the springs were out there. And so if we reverse that and you go through the zoning process, the comprehensive plan, I don't believe allows or didn't take into account where these warehouses are going to go. So you really probably should consider opening up the comprehensive plan. And Jan will kill me for even saying this probably, but I'm not an expert in that. I know enough just to be dangerous because she is the expert in that field. But it will be very difficult to build warehouses. Now, some of the distilleries have current property that they're going to be allowed to move forward with. And that would be Barstown Bourbon Company. Heaven Hill's got a few left, not many left. Jim Beam's in the middle are talking about a massive project in the Boston area that will have to go through the zoning process. And I understand nobody wants to be surprised, but the whole idea was to put them in the rural areas, away from the population.
What is the 100-acre rule? What is that rule?
In an agricultural zone, fiscal court allows for you to build whiskey warehouses as a permitted use. Not have to go through the public hearing process and go through the whole zoning, because now if the distilleries apply for those right now, they'll get beat up. It'll be political when it gets to the fiscal court level. The magistrates will have to make a decision politically. Do you allow it or not allow it? And it won't be based on the true need of the industry. I've been in that seat before.
Mm-hmm.
It is a political issue when you have to make a decision, but you have to keep those personal things sometimes to the side.
Yeah, but what is the 100-acre rule?
The 100-acre is you can build warehouses without going through the zoning.
Yeah, if they own.
As a permitted use.
So in other words, they have to own 100 acres?
Yeah, 100 acres or more.
Okay, that's what I was
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
get at.
Yeah,
And there are established setbacks and guidelines they must follow as
Yeah.
well
yeah.
on that.
No, one of the magistrates had made note that I watched the last fiscal court meeting. Thank you for having that available to us, Jim. That's always an asset. That the idea that the farmland was being gobbled up by the distilleries. Now, I was involved in several of those projects, and a lot of the farmland, say for instance, I'm going to use my friends at Bardstown Bourbon Company. They bought a farm. We actually looked at it to tie into our Nelson County Industrial Park, the Croom Farm.
Yeah.
And only a small portion of that, or a minority portion of that, can actually be built. While it was like 200 or 300 acres, only about 100 acres of that is really viable for the warehouses. The rest of it is wooded areas, the ravines, and not so good for farming. So we probably should, if we're going to talk about how much land came out of as being taken up or used by the distilleries, how much is really tillable and farmland? And if there's 1,000 acres out there, I'd be surprised. Do you know how many acres are in Nelson County? We have 420 square miles, give or take a mile or two. There's about 270,000 acres in Nelson County. So it's not even, when you divide that out to get your percentage,
Right.
there are about 4 zeros and there's a 3. but that was in the proposed ordinance, moratorium ordinance about the farmland
Right.
excuse.
Right. But you know, when that change happened in 2015, one of the problems at that time, if I remember correctly, was that warehouses were originally designed to be placed in I-2 industrial zoning.
Exactly.
And the Planning Commission did not like the idea of zoning 100 acres out in the middle of rural areas.
I-2.
Zoning it for industrial, because if something happened and the use changed to that property, you could put any sort of heavy industry in an I-2 zoning.
Exactly, and part of moving them out to the rural areas was you pushed them away from the valuable infrastructure
Right,
that you had, because the warehouses need minimum infrastructure.
right.
Yeah, they do not need sewer, do not need gas. They need water. A lot of times they have their own water sources, but not all the time. So that was the other, I guess, educated decision we made. Part of the education that we did on studying why we pushed them out. Now, you cannot talk about warehouses without talking about bottling and the distillery, shipping. You cannot talk about anything. They're all intertwined there.
Sure.
And let's talk about the jobs for a minute. And there's about 1,400 direct jobs with our local distilleries. I'm talking about direct. The indirect is as many or more. For instance, Busey Construction Company has about 500 employees now. And a big bulk of those are working on distillery projects. Not all warehouses. A lot of times, I know out to Heaven Hill, they're doing a major renovation of the offices and the other aspects of the property. And the distilleries continue to invest. And you take those 1,400 jobs and you try to replace the scale that they're making, the health insurance benefits they have, you will not find an industry that will do even better. And these people are earning a living, working at the distilleries, usually anywhere from $50,000 to $65,000 on the average. And that's important. I don't care, you can't, but they're intertwined. You cannot talk about the warehouses, making it more difficult to get the warehouses done without talking about how you're going to affect the others.
Right.
That's the bottom line. The distillery businesses, the employees within the distilleries are important to paying their taxes to the local community. I estimate it based on the number of employees working directly now, this is not the indirect, that the distillery employees fund the city of Bardstown between $600,000 and $700,000 a year in occupational tax. The county about $125,000. And that's not chump change. Those are important numbers to the community, the fire and police and so forth.
Right.
So all those start. You say, well, they're not going to lay anybody off. It will affect if they start moving to other counties.
Right.
It will eventually. If they, for instance, I can talk a little bit about this because I know the family at Heaven Hill. Heaven Hill has a plant where they make bourbon in Louisville, Bernheim Distillery downtown.
Right.
Guess what? Indiana does not have an ad valorem tax. And right now, Heaven Hill is shipping that bourbon out here and barreling it here and aging most of it here. And it would be just as simple to go right across the river and build some warehouses and ship that bourbon over there. And people don't think about those things in their business.
Especially as expensive as fuel gets to be for transportation.
Exactly. And the location, to ship where go. I mean, they're right on the river there, off of Main Street, I believe is where it is, or whatever. I can't remember exactly what street it's on. But when Heaven Hill was looking at building a new distillery, I can talk about this because I'm out of office now. But they actually were looking at other communities, and as Max said the other day at the fiscal court meeting, his family's been here 100 years. And they looked at other counties because you got the younger generation coming on,
Sure.
and they got different ideals, and that's fine. But to keep Heaven Hill here was a big win for the community. I can assure you of that. I would have been embarrassed as an elected official to see Heaven Hill go to another county. I won't mention the counties and that they've looked at, but I was heavily involved in that. So was Mayor Heaton as well. But I would have probably been the most embarrassing thing that would have ever happened to me if Heaven Hill had left our community.
Well, I think it's important to understand, too, staying here was a conscious decision they made, choice they made.
Yes, it did. They could have gone somewhere else.
To continue to invest.
Yeah, I hear people say, oh, they're not going anywhere, they're not going anywhere. Let me tell you, Sazerac, who owns Barton's Distillery, those folks, I see how I'm going to phrase it. I'm not trying to get political. I'm really trying not to. They were upset with the fact that they were going to do some annexations.
Right, I remember that.
And there was another mayor at the time. And it would not have surprised me if Sazerac would not have emptied every one of those warehouses out eventually. And I can see them loading the trucks up and taking them to Owensboro, which they have a plant, or across the river in Indiana, where they have a plant now. Don't think it won't happen. I was able to be a judge for a long time, and I saw 3 factories close that I can think of off the top of my head. Burdensome was one. American Ingredients was the biggest one, and that was probably the hardest one. And then the other one was Newcoat. All 3 of those shut down for various reasons, and it changed every one of those people working in those factories' lives, and we surely don't want that to happen to our bourbon industry. Now, you say it won't happen, you take a little piece here, a little piece there, you start nickel and diming, or making the industry not feel welcome, and then all of a sudden generations change. And then the next people don't have that passion for the local community.
Right.
So that's important for them, to protect every single job. Every one of those people that work in one of those distilleries. You ride by Barton, Heaven Hill, Jim Beam in Boston. You ride by those places, you see somebody got a truck parked there or a car, and they're earning a decent living. with some of the best health insurance there is. And if you had to deal with health insurance and the cost of health insurance,
Yeah.
you learn to appreciate that.
Right.
And everything that we can do as a community to solidify the importance of the bourbon industry to our community without stepping on toes is important.
Yeah, you talked about your experience with Heaven Hill and your alliance with that family that goes back a long time ago. I mean, your experience.
1971, when I started working for them.
So you talk to us a little bit about that. I mean,
Well-
I'm not, a lot of people would not be aware. I mean, I'm old enough, I remember that. But a lot of people are not.
You know, I worked for the Shapiras in the dry good business called the Louisville stores. I started sweeping floors and washing windows and stocking the shelves. And as I grew older, you know, they moved me up in the chain and the operations. They had 18 stores or so at one time. I lose track exactly how many. They would open a store and close a store, and the town wasn't performing right, just like the retailers do today. And as I grew into the ages with actually Max Shapira's father was in the store every day. And while you dealt with the dry goods side of it, you felt the passion for the bourbon industry. And I learned more about it later on with Max's cousin Harry, who was in charge of the store's operations. As we traveled from town to town, taking care of stores and setting up new stores and closing stores, and you learned a lot about the bourbon industry, and while the people at the stores were making, say, minimum wage, the bourbon industry folks at Heaven Hill or Barton's, whoever it was at the time, Skaggs Distillery, and go back, remember that on Bloomfield Road, now owned by Heaven Hill. Those employees were making $1 or $2 more an hour. Or I'll use an example, and they were making better wages. And uniforms they were providing. Most of them had their own uniforms they would provide to the employees. So you learned that those were important jobs. You know, at that time, I wasn't here when they closed the sewing factory down. I mean, as judge, I was here, but I wasn't a judge. Closed the sewing factory. That affected everybody's lives. Those women that worked, most of them were women that worked there. It was a good job for those folks to have, compared to cleaning houses or you know, as far as the pay goes. So I can't emphasize enough how important that industry is to the community overall.
Well, Judge, I'm sorry, Dean.
That's okay.
It's still okay, you can still go, Judge.
What's just off the top of your head, what if you were judge? I shouldn't ask you this way.
Remember, we're not going to get political. If I can help, I'm trying not to, Jimmy.
What would be a good resolution for this? Because I think a lot of this is driven by the fact that the warehouses, with the 100-acre rule as it stands now, there's no input, there's no public hearing.
I understand.
You know, as a permitted use, and the feeling I have, and again, I haven't heard this directly from anybody, is that some people don't like the fact that it's a permitted use, you know, without any
Public input.
Public input.
Well, when we were analyzing this, that was considered, I assure you. But you take a man or a guy or a lady that has a farm that's got 100 or 200 acres, they can open up and start a major farming operation there without going through the process, which is important, don't get me wrong. They can have a slopping operation, which is very stinky.
Right.
I assure you it is.
Oh.
And then they can have a milking operation that hundreds of cattle that becomes very odor and it travels quite a bit. You can have a chicken farm, and the chicken houses are pretty stinky. If you've ever been around one of them, so there are I guess odors and things that leave the property on a farm And of course, to the distilleries, the thing that's leaving the distillery property is the angel share.
Right.
It allows the fungus to grow. Fat, there is natural mold and fungus in the air.
Right. Right.
The yeast evaporation part of that is allows it to breed. I had the EPA come down when I first was elected. The first couple of years, I wanted to educate myself on the black fungus because I kept hearing about it. Like Timmy says, he's hearing about it, and I wanted to know what if it was truly a health hazard. Mm-hmm. We needed to do something about it. And I can tell you, if you deal with the Environmental Protection Agency at the state level, even the federal level, I'm sure probably even worse maybe, they don't hold any punches. When it comes to their jobs, they are dedicated. And they explained to me that the fungus in Nelson County and other counties that have the bourbon industry is a little more prominent because of the angel share that is you can actually smell. I live right across from Heaven Hill Distillery, and you go down a little dip, you can actually smell the bourbon and 1,000 feet, 1,200, 1,500 feet away, maybe a little bit further than that.
Yeah.
And it smelled pretty good to me.
I had to learn to get used to that
Sounds
when
like
I
home.
came to bars.
But that was the cooking of it, though. I'm talking about the angel share, which is the bourbon itself. Now, the cooking that you're talking, that's in the dry house usually, where they're drying out. Usually, it creates you're cooking something a little bit too long.
Yeah.
It's a little more sour smelling. But this is the angel share, and it's leaving the property and by evaporations. But with the natural mold in there, this is what the EPA explained to me. Natural mold in the air, it allows that mold or fungus to multiply and grow on sides of the warehouses, the houses, the cars, and so forth. But it is real. It's not,
Oh, yeah.
It is
cost
real.
me about $300 a year to get that power washed out.
My grandmother lived in a rural part of Arkansas, not a distillery within 200 miles, probably, in a rural area, but she was down a little bit of a dip. She had black fungus on her skin, but not as much, mind you. But it is in the air. It is part of the community, whether you had the distilleries or not. But it does grow more rapidly.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And that's the way the EPA explained it to me. And again, like I said, they don't hold any punches at all.
Well, that's interesting because I have not heard that before.
Well, I grew up on South Center Street in the Chateau.
Yes, you did.
So we were, well, of course, back in the day, they burned coal too. So we
Yes.
had coal ash or whatever.
Yeah.
But I grew up just considering it as part of, it's just part of the way things are. I mean, a lot of people in my neighborhood there on South Center Street work for Barton's.
Oh, yes.
And it fed a lot of mouths because we were all good Catholics, 4, 5, 8 children in a 900 square foot house, do the math. But it fed a lot of families.
Yes, it did.
Put a lot of kids in college.
And likewise, it's still doing.
Yeah, still do it.
Yeah. And the distillery was there before the subdivision was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, way before.
Yeah. Yeah, but that, anyway, well, Jim, we need to take a commercial break.
Please.
You're listening to Bradford and Brooks and our very special guest, former Judge Executive Dean Watts. We'll be back after these messages. Please stay tuned.
One who didn't
All
deserve
right,
it.
you're back with Bradford and Brooks. Jim and Margie here with you till the top of the hour, and then our special guest, former Judge Executive Dean Watts, and talk a little bit about the bourbon industry. And, my guesstimation is they are probably as an industry, the biggest part of our economic engine here in Nelson County, I would dare say.
Yeah, Kim actually have a graph on that, and I wish I'd gotten a copy of that to look at that. And we did a little takeoff on it about a couple of years ago to see what percentage of the, employees in Nelson County
Right.
working in the industry. Again, these were direct. There's a difference. There's a direct job and indirect jobs.
Right.
And the indirect sometimes is as important as the job itself, because
Sure.
I guarantee the 1,400 jobs that are in Nelson County working in the direct warehouses, not warehouses, but the distilleries, there's at least that many or more indirect jobs, possibly more.
In supportive.
And supportive. somebody like a distillery can get anywhere from 80 to 100 trucks in a day. So I have to make sure everybody knows. My wife's in the trucking business, so I know a little bit about how much bourbon is and other spirits are hauled, not just bourbon. Bourbon's not the majority of a lot of these distilleries' business anymore.
Right.
They got other spirits that make a difference.
Diversified.
They're very different, and that's how I think some of these distilleries will survive through the hard times. History has shown in Nelson County, nationwide, that the bourbon industry is up, it stays up, and then it goes down. When is it going to go down? Usually the whiskey people know that. They know about how much scotch is being drank versus bourbon, how much beer is being drank versus the bourbon.
They track the trends.
Oh yeah, and sometimes they get surprised by those trends too, and it can happen. And if you don't think it can't happen, it will happen. You know how that goes. Especially as an elected official, you try to be smarter than the economy. It doesn't work that way. It's not good. I'd like to talk a little bit, Jim, about the other part of the industry that I appreciated as a judge is the fact that they were a giving industry to the community. I made a little short list here of some nonprofits in Nelson County that benefited from donations made by the industry. I won't go into who gave what, but a lot of times people give something to a nonprofit. They don't want their names out there all the time.
Right.
I can name Flagey Hospital was one of the biggest probably benefactors of donations from the distillery business. Stephen Foster Drama Association was a big benefactor. Guthrie Opportunity Center, the Bread for Life, the Bardstown Village, Nelson County Community Clinic, the Dog Park off of Loretta Road there, the Humane Society, and the Fine Arts in Bardstown are just some that have received grants from the industry. They did not have to do that. I'm going back years. It didn't happen just because of House Bill 5 trying to create a little more, community-minded people. But this happened before all the tax went away.
Right.
Let's go to tax that went away. Now, which one's more important? $8.6 million in tax going away, or $600, $700, $800 million worth of payroll? The payroll is the big thing, and I preach that. When I actually attended several of those committee meetings in Frankfurt, trying to convince them that this was a bad idea, what they were trying to do.
Right.
And actually at that time predicted, I said, you're going to cause a lot of unrest in the community. The bourbon industry had a pretty darn good reputation. Got their problems with the fungus and all, but now you're taking the tax dollars away, and guess who's going to have to pay that? It's going to be me as a taxpayer, and that's in their minds. I heard it this morning. I guess we're going to have to eventually pay more taxes, whether it's funneling through the state back to the whatever. It's going to be more taxes that's subsidizing their business. In reality, though, the payroll that's generated by these distilleries are so much more important than the tax that they were paying. They're going to still be paying property tax on their regular properties.
Right.
They're not going to be just totally scot-free, and that's important. And the big picture needs to be looked at here, and to go back to do away with the 100-acre as a permitted use, it will impact the industry. Now, it won't see it right away, maybe, because Bardstown Bourbon Company's got a farm, Lux Road's got a farm. Beams is getting ready. They don't have a farm yet. They're getting ready to do a big farm.
Okay.
Trying to. Now, how's that going to impact that project? You don't know.
Well, that's right. If they don't own it yet, they may.
You got to go through the zoning process.
Right.
Yeah. If you don't own it yet.
Yeah.
And suppose you bought it, and my question to the court would be, there's some of the distilleries have bought property and haven't started their project yet with the intent of going on the 100-acre rule. So how are they going to be impacted? And what permitting process, are we going to put obstacles in the way on the permitting process when the actual permitting process? That's been discussed before. So I'm really worried about the overall industry. Now, it sounds like I'm the sky falling in, it's not going to fall in today or tomorrow. But it will have an impact. You know, Max said the other day at the meeting for fiscal court, can you really call yourself the bourbon capital of the world when you put roadblocks up? And I'm paraphrasing a little bit.
Right.
When you put roadblocks up for any industry, not just the bourbon, in any industry, it's not good.
Right. His comments were some of the best, I thought, but all of them made good points. And I think even David Mandel spoke about what really brought them and their investment to Bardstown. You know, it was people working together, city and county.
Yeah, Kim and I,
Bill
Shekels, we were kicking each other underneath the desk a couple times. But, you know, I sit across the table from David when we were negotiating the deal, because the county owned the property.
Right.
And we hadn't sold property at that time for the industrial park for a pretty good while. You know, that was the downturn in the housing and all that stuff was going on. We'd been gone 5 or 6 years, hadn't sold a piece of property, and we were paying interest on a pretty good sized note.
Right.
And you do that to create opportunity for your community. And they bought 100 acres, right at 100 acres, and we got criticized because we sold them so much land. And but their business plan showed that they were going to build a distillery, a couple of warehouses, and then their business plan also showed that they'd like to have a restaurant, and then they'd like to eventually have bottling.
Right.
Well, they have lived up to everything that they said they would do, Bardstown Bourbon Company, and it's a gamble you take as a community. Now, we got criticized because the infrastructure was already there, but guess what? They need all that infrastructure now that was in place for everything that we're going to do. But again, I got friends in Washington County, Marion County that sold prime property with infrastructure in it, natural gas, water, sewer, and banking on getting the distilled spirits tax forever. That's not going to happen anymore. You know, it goes away in 10 years, 12 years, it starts diminishing. I haven't seen the exact number of years it takes to get it, but it's going to be diminishing. And many of them probably would have not done their projects or deals knowing that they would not get the bourbon tax.
Right.
Because they were banking on it. You got a county like Eminence, Henry County, I believe, that has no distillery, and a couple of the Louisville distilleries have bought property and building warehouses, and they did incentives to them, for them, and guess what? They're not going to get that forever.
Right.
And they have no distillery. You know, at least we do have the jobs.
Right.
I'm talking about the real bulk of the jobs. Every job is important, but the bulk of the jobs is in bottling, shipping, office. That's where your bulk of your numbers are. But the other jobs are related, are important, but they're not getting, you know, those guys have taken those barrels to the warehouses in Henry County. Probably their payroll's probably coming out of Louisville.
Right.
And they're there. And that's another thing on the 100-acre deal. Most of when they put the bourbon in the warehouses, guess what? It sits for minimum 2 years. Almost everybody's doing a 4-year or older bourbon. It's just the market's better for that. Some of it's 8 to 10 years old.
Yeah.
You don't touch it. You may go in there and send a guy or two and rotate it, but you don't have truck traffic, constant truck travel.
Right.
Putting it in a rural area, that was something that we did think about when we did that. So the idea of the traffic flow, the moving them out away from the infrastructure, big infrastructure that you had, and the fact that the black fungus doesn't affect as many people, if any at all, sometimes.
Right.
Let me ask you a hypothetical question.
Okay.
All right. Say you, armed with your knowledge, that you are a mediator, and you're asked to sit down at the table with a representative of the bourbon industry and someone from the town. What would be the advice you would give them on how to make things smoother, or you know, resolve
mediate the
issues?
situation.
Yes, you're the grand mediator here.
First, you have to find out what your real complaint is.
Right. Right.
What your real complaint with the industry is. Is it truly the House Bill 5?
Yeah.
Or is it the fact that people complain about the fungus? The fungus is here. It's not going anywhere. And because the distilleries have such a large quantity of warehouses now, you're not going to make it go away. And find out the real, I guess, major problem that you want to accomplish. Then once you do that, then you say, well, maybe how we can make it work. You follow what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes. But
Yeah.
also, we're talking about the financial issue.
Well, the 8.6 million that the schools and the fiscal court, if the fiscal court, if I were well, I'm trying to stay not, I'm trying not to be political here now. I would analyze today what your 4% growth will be for the next 10 years. And where you're going to be positioned on that $1.2 million, $1.3 million that you're going to lose. And you won't lose it all right away. And actually, you won't lose it all till I think it's 15 or 20 years. I don't know the full nuts and bolts of it. So how does that growth, allowable growth, pan out?
Right.
For instance, now the state has a lot of money in the general fund, right? They raise taxes. They has a lot of new taxes to accomplish that. The sales tax increase. Nobody had an estimate of what it's bringing in and how much it's going to bring in, and they cut the income tax by 0.5 point, I believe, right?
Right.
And so is that revenue outweighing the cut that they made on the income tax? I'd be curious to see how that pans out. Same point here. What would it be taking the 4% growth and see where you are? Have somebody analyze it. How much will it, if you took the 4% growth every year, which you're allowed to do, without a public, well, you can have a public hearing, but you don't have to recall.
It's not, yeah.
Not recall. So I'd like to see. I would analyze that immediately, and then I would look at, are there any fees that we probably have been subsidizing out of the general fund?
Right.
Like, for instance, the 911 fee is still subsidized by the general fund. A few other little odds and ends. Planning and zoning is subsidized by the general fund.
Right.
But you got to be cautious about that till you raise the fee so high nobody can afford or would want to do them. So there's a balance to all that, and somebody needs to balance that. That's how I would approach the financial side of it. I would not be in a hurry to do anything as far as raising taxes go or a new tax. That's easy to do. And it only hurts one time. Politically.
Well, Dean, we're down to about the last 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
Anything else you want to leave with us on your thoughts on the current state of bourbon?
As far as what the court wants to accomplish, I think they need to. I would ask the magistrates, put in writing to me what you want to accomplish. Don't just say it. You have to put something in writing and reduce it to writing. Sometimes I have done this. I get ready to send somebody back an email or a text that wasn't real nice, and because I was mad at the moment or aggravated at the moment. But when I reduced it to writing and saw it in front of me, I tore it up or got rid of the text or email because it doesn't do anybody any good to get angry. And I don't, same way here, I think if you could reduce, I hear all this stuff that farmland's being taken, this and that, but put it in writing, put a comparison. What are we angry about? What are we mad about? Why we want to change it? Because a handful of people or a group of people don't like the fungus. And that's easy. That's an easy excuse.
Right.
To use right now, because that's always been out there. It's been out there for 30 years since the public got educated on the bourbon, and we've had the growth. So I'd like to see exactly what I would if I was still involved. But
Well, I'm going to tell you, Dean, that many summers I made 50 cents washing it off my daddy's car for the mail route.
Yeah.
So,
But how often did your daddy wash his car?
whenever he said, get out there and wash it.
But he didn't wash it unless he had to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, my grandfather used to back us up out of the garage and let the elements wash it. He said, when it rained, he'd listen to the forecast and back it right out. I've seen him do it.
All right, Dean, well, we're just about down to
Well,
the
thank you
wire
for
here.
allowing me to speak today, Jimmy.
Our pleasure.
The industry's important. I think just everybody take a pause.
All right, we'll see you next week with another Bradford and Brooks. Have a great week.
Thank you all for allowing me.
Hometown Radio, WBRT Bardstown, 1320 AM, 97.1 FM, and on 94.9 FM in Lebanon, playing all the classics from country's legends.